Hi, I'm Lucy and welcome to Beautifully Unfinished. This is the space to just be and belong. I'm so glad you're here. Last week we spoke about building a life you didn't need a holiday from. We talked about creating a life that feels peaceful, meaningful, authentic, rather than the one that we're constantly trying to escape. As I thought about that episode afterwards, another question kept coming back to me. Are we building a life where we truly belong, or are we simply building a life where we become very good at fitting in? There is a difference. And honestly, this is something I've been guilty of for much of my life. Many of us are. Sometimes we become experts at reading the room. We know how to be what everybody wants us to be. We know how to become dependable. We know how to be the funny one, the strong one, the peacemaker, the achiever, the caregiver perhaps. We slowly adapt ourselves until we fit comfortably into everybody else's expectations. The problem is fitting in often comes at the expense of belonging, because fitting in asks us to change. Belonging asks us to come home to ourselves. I came across a quote by Brené Brown that stopped me in my tracks. She said, "True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are." Just sit with that for the moment. Shall I say it again? True belonging doesn't require you to change who you are. It requires you to be who you are. Many of us have spent years trying to earn acceptance by becoming someone else. We soften our opinions, we hide parts of ourselves, we stay quiet to avoid conflict, we laugh when something isn't really that funny, we apologize for taking up space, we become whoever we think people will accept. At first that works. People like us, we fit in. But somewhere along the way we begin to lose ourselves because pretending is just plain exhausting. And eventually the mask becomes too heavy to wear. I also wonder whether fitting in sometimes starts long before we even realize it. Perhaps you were naturally good at sport and people praised you for it, so that became your identity. That's the sports person. Maybe you were the clever one, or the responsible one, or the one that everyone relied on. And we become that identity. Sometimes we don't consciously choose it. Other people just hand it to us. And before we know it, we're living according to who we've always been expected to be instead of discovering who we actually are. That's a frightening place to find yourself. Especially you realize it in midlife. Maybe that's the midlife crisis. Because many of us suddenly ask the question, if I stop being what everybody expects, who am I? That's where courage comes in. You know, we hear that word vulnerability and immediately think of weakness. But Brené Brown describes vulnerability very differently. She describes it as uncertainty, it's risk, it's emotional exposure. And when you think about all those things, vulnerability isn't weakness at all, it's actually courage. To have the courage to be imperfect is something quite extraordinary. Every single act of courage contains vulnerability. Starting over, that's vulnerability. Leaving an unhealthy relationship is vulnerable. Saying, "I need help," is vulnerable. Speaking your truth, setting boundaries, being yourself when you aren't sure how people will respond. Maybe that's one of the bravest things you'll ever do. That's vulnerability. Because belonging demands courage. Real belonging requires us to step outside this comfort zone, and it asks us to confront our fears. Our fear of rejection, disappointing people, our fear that if they knew the real us, they might not love us. That's pretty uncomfortable. But perhaps belonging was never meant to be comfortable in the beginning. It becomes peaceful on the other side of courage. We all deserve to belong, every single one of us. Not because we've earned it, not because we've become enough, simply because we are enough. And when you finally find those places or those people where you truly belong, something remarkable happens. Your shoulders drop. You stop performing. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop wondering if you said the right thing. You simply exhale, feel safe, feel seen, feel accepted. You feel home. I often think home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's a person. Sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes it's a group of friends where you never have to pretend. Sometimes it's simply the feeling that you can be yourself. For me, one of the simplest pictures of belonging looks a bit like this. Imagine lying in bed with your iPad propped up on a pillow, snuggled into the person that you love, watching a series, perhaps on Netflix, except you haven't watched a single episode. You've fallen asleep halfway through the first one. Your glasses are gently taken off your face, and you wake up in the morning wondering when you fell asleep and what was the series even called. Now that, to me, that's belonging. Not because of Netflix, not because of the comfortable bed, not because of any of that, but because you were safe enough to be completely relaxed. There was nothing to prove, nothing to perform, nothing to protect. You simply rested. Isn't that what we're all looking for? A place of peace and rest. The world is so full of judgment. Social media tells us how to look. Success tells us who we should become. Comparison tells us we're always behind. So we put on these masks, not because we're dishonest, but because we're afraid. Afraid that we won't be loved if people meet the real us. There's that old saying, don't judge someone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. Well, there's a great deal of wisdom in that, because every person you meet is carrying something you know nothing about. Yet, the strange thing is, the more we hide ourselves, the lonelier we actually become. People may admire the version that we're presenting out there, but they can never truly love the person that they haven't actually met. Real connection only happens when the real person shows up. Maybe that's why belonging feels so rare. It asks us to risk being known. And yes, sometimes people won't understand us. Some relationships may change. Some people may walk away. But perhaps they weren't making room for the real you anyway. The right people won't ask you to shrink. They won't ask you to edit yourself. They won't ask you to become someone different to earn your place. They'll simply make space for you, exactly as you are. Maybe that's something worth thinking about this week. Where in your life are you simply fitting in? And where do you truly belong? Because there is a world of difference. One leaves you exhausted. The other leaves you at peace. One requires performance and the other invites your presence. One asks you to wear a mask and the other asks you to finally take it off. Beautifully Unfinished isn't about becoming someone else. It's about having the courage to become more of who you already are. You're enough. Perhaps that is what belonging really is. Not finding a place where you have to earn your welcome, but finding the people, the spaces, and the life where your authentic self has been welcome all along. And maybe that's one of the greatest gifts we can give ourselves. The courage to stop fitting in and finally come home. Thank you for joining me today. If this episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you would like, follow and subscribe, and perhaps share it with someone who you think might need to hear this. Until next week, remember that none of us are finished. None of us have it all figured out, and that's okay. We're all just beautifully unfinished. See you next week. Bye for now.